They say most betrayals don't happen in the heat of passion, but in the quiet spaces where people stop paying attention. I didn't know it then, but my betrayal began the night Michael casually suggested his nephew, Ryan, should stay with me while he was away. On paper, it sounded harmless, even considerate. Michael was heading out of state for a work trip, a familiar routine for him, and he didn't want me alone in the house. That was Michael in a nutshell: practical, predictable, always thinking in terms of logistics. Never once did he consider the emotional undercurrents that might accompany such a decision. I wasn't the kind of wife who challenged him on small matters. After 7 years of marriage, I'd learned that questioning his choices often ended in long explanations about efficiency or logic, and I rarely had the energy to argue. So I nodded, smiled faintly, and told him it was fine. Ryan wasn't a stranger. He was family, though not by blood, to me. In his early 20s, with untamed brown hair and restless blue eyes, he carried himself with the kind of reckless ease that made him feel both endearing and dangerous. He was Michael's opposite in every way: vibrant, spontaneous, full of stories that had no tidy endings. Whenever he visited, he seemed to inject a dose of color into the gray landscape of our home. I had always kept him at arm's length, not out of distrust, but out of self-preservation. There was something about the way he asked me questions that Michael never thought to ask, or the way his laughter filled the room, that unsettled me. I didn't want to admit how easily I was drawn to it. So when Michael suggested Ryan should stay over, my first instinct was unease. But the unease was quickly buried under the armor of reason. It's family. It's only for a couple of nights. Nothing will happen. That evening, as I set out clean sheets in the guest room, I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest. The house already seemed different without Michael's steady presence. Quieter, yes, but also oddly lighter. I tried to ignore the sensation, tried to frame it as simple nerves. Then Ryan arrived, backpack slung over his shoulder, smile wide as he stepped through the door. "Hey, Claire," he said, his voice casual but warm, like we were sharing a secret no one else knew. In that moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not enough to topple, but enough to warn me that something dangerous was beginning. I didn't know it then, but by agreeing to let him stay, I had already opened the door to more than just a house guest. I had opened the door to a choice that would alter the shape of my marriage forever. Marriage, at least in the beginning, had seemed like a fortress to me. With Michael, I believed I had finally found safety after years of uncertainty. He was the kind of man who never forgot anniversaries, who filed taxes months before deadlines, who always knew the best route to avoid traffic. Stability radiated from him like a shield. For years I told myself that was enough, but stability has a darker side. It numbs. It lulls you into believing that routine is the same as love. Somewhere in our 7 years together, Michael and I stopped truly seeing each other. Our dinners became silent exchanges of food, our nights a choreography of habit. I still loved him, in my way, but it was the kind of love that felt muted, a steady hum instead of a melody. That's what made Ryan's presence feel so dangerous. He was, by all accounts, just a guest, but he carried into the house something I hadn't realized I was starving for: energy. He spoke quickly, laughed easily, moved with the restlessness of someone who hadn't yet been weighed down by life's obligations. On the second evening, I cooked while Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter, telling me about his classes and his dreams of traveling after graduation. His words were nothing extraordinary, yet they stirred something restless in me. When he asked about my painting, something I had abandoned years ago when work and marriage consumed me, I froze. "I haven't touched a brush in years," I admitted, my voice almost apologetic. "Why not?" he asked, as if the answer could be as simple as just starting again. His tone wasn't mocking. It was curious, earnest. Michael had never once noticed the dust gathering on my easel in the garage. But Ryan noticed, and that difference, small as it was, felt monumental. The unease I had felt before began to shift into something else, something sharper. I caught myself listening too closely to his stories, watching the way his expression lit up when he laughed. My conscience whispered warnings, but my heart leaned forward anyway. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I found myself thinking not of Michael's steady voice on the phone earlier, but of Ryan's eyes when he asked why I'd stopped painting. It was such a simple question, but it cut deeper than Michael's carefully constructed routines ever did. By the time morning light filtered through the curtains, I knew the dynamic in the house had changed. Ryan wasn't just Michael's nephew anymore. He was the embodiment of everything I'd been missing. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I could already feel myself standing at the edge of something I couldn't easily step back from. The first few hours of Ryan's extended stay were easy to dismiss. We laughed over trivial stories, shared snacks in the living room, and watched late-night movies that neither of us fully paid attention to. Yet beneath the surface, the air was charged in a way I hadn't anticipated. Every glance he threw my way lingered longer than it should have, and every brush of his hand against mine sent sparks through my chest I wasn't ready to acknowledge. By the second night, the energy between us had shifted into something unmistakable. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, folding laundry, prepping breakfast, organizing shelves. But Ryan's presence made even ordinary chores feel electric. He would sit nearby, commenting casually on my choices or offering playful teasing, and I found myself hanging on every word. His voice had a cadence that made me forget the silence Michael's absence had imposed. At one point, while clearing dishes from the counter, I felt his hand brush against mine. I flinched but didn't pull completely away. He caught my reaction, smirked slightly, and said nothing. That small, unspoken acknowledgement sent a wave of panic and desire crashing through me. What am I feeling? I wondered, my mind rebelling against the guilt creeping into my thoughts. Later that evening, we found ourselves on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. The conversation became quieter, slower, and weighted with things neither of us dared to name. I laughed less. My heart thudded more. He spoke of dreams I had long forgotten, of places I once wanted to see, of emotions I had locked away. His curiosity about me, so effortless, so sincere, was intoxicating. "Claire," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "you deserve to feel alive. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I felt a lump in my throat. Michael had never said anything like that. He had never paused to see the woman behind the wife, the layers behind the routine. And in that moment, I realized how lonely I had been in a marriage that others might have envied. The night stretched on. We shared stories, jokes, memories, and silences that spoke louder than words. I caught myself inching closer to him on the porch swing, drawn by a gravity I knew was dangerous. Every instinct screamed to resist, to remember my vows, to honor Michael. But the pull was irresistible, and I felt powerless under it. By the time Ryan excused himself for the night, I knew nothing would be the same. The air in the house felt different, heavier, charged with unspoken promises and forbidden thoughts. I lay awake in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, trembling at the realization that my emotions had begun to betray my better judgment. For the first time, I understood that temptation doesn't arrive with a bang. It seeps quietly, persistently, and by the time you notice it, you are already caught in its current. And I knew, deep down, that the currents between Ryan and me were growing stronger, and that the moment of decision, of no return, was approaching faster than I could prepare for. The night that everything changed didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no storm, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet house, two people lingering too close to the edge of what should have been forbidden. By that point, I could no longer pretend the tension between Ryan and me was innocent. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word had built into a force that neither of us could ignore. We were in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across his face. I tried to focus on the book in my lap, but I could feel his eyes tracing mine, his presence overwhelming the room. He leaned forward slightly, as if drawn by some gravity neither of us could resist. My heart pounded, and for the first time I felt my body betraying my mind entirely. "Claire," he said, his voice low, carrying an intimacy that sent chills down my spine. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the edges of the book. "Ryan, we shouldn't—" "I know," he interrupted gently, his hand brushing mine, this time deliberately. The warmth seared through me. "But it's too late for pretending, isn't it? The words hung between us, heavy with truth. He wasn't wrong. It was too late. All the small gestures, the shared silences, the laughter, and the stolen moments had already shifted something fundamental. My carefully constructed boundaries were crumbling, and I felt a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and guilt swelling in my chest. For a long minute, we just sat there, our hands brushing, our breaths synchronized, each of us silently acknowledging the unspoken. It wasn't passion in its purest sense. It wasn't love. It was the dangerous thrill of being seen in a way that Michael never had, of having my loneliness acknowledged, of having desire mirrored back at me. Then it happened. One fleeting motion, a tilt of the head, a closeness that shouldn't have existed. And suddenly the dam broke. I felt myself giving in, and so did he. It wasn't about morality anymore. It was about raw, undeniable need. The boundaries we had fought to maintain dissolved like mist under the morning sun. In that moment, I glimpsed a reflection of myself I had buried long ago, a woman who craved attention, validation, and the fire of being truly alive. And when Ryan whispered my name, I couldn't stop the tremor of recognition in my voice. When it was over, the silence of the house felt heavier than before. The weight of what we had done pressed down on me, suffocating in its gravity. I couldn't look at him without seeing both the thrill and the danger of our actions mirrored in his eyes. I lay in bed later, heart hammering, guilt and exhilaration warring inside me. Michael would return in less than a day, oblivious to the fault lines that had formed under the foundation of our home, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me, that nothing, not words, not excuses, not time, could ever return the house to the quiet stability it had once held. For the first time, I understood that some nights change everything. And for me, this night had changed everything forever. Michael returned that evening, completely unaware of the tension and choices that had unfolded in his absence. His voice was calm, steady, and familiar, the same voice that had once been the anchor of my world. He asked about my week, made small talk about his trip, and unpacked his suitcase while humming softly. The ordinary rhythm of his presence felt like both a comfort and a torment, reminding me of everything I had jeopardized. Ryan had left quietly earlier, leaving behind only the faint trace of his energy, the echo of laughter, the warmth of conversation, and the memory of moments I could never reclaim. I walked through the empty house, touching objects with an awareness I hadn't felt in years. Every surface seemed to hold a memory, every shadow a secret. The house was the same, yet nothing felt unchanged. I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the woman I had glimpsed that night. Bold, reckless, alive in ways I hadn't allowed myself to be. It terrified me, and yet it thrilled me. Guilt and exhilaration wrestled within me, leaving me breathless and unsettled. I knew I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. A line defined not by law or morality alone, but by the fragile trust that had anchored my marriage. Days passed, and life returned to its outward normalcy. Michael's routines remained unchanged. His affection was the same as it had always been. But inside me, everything had shifted. I noticed details in him I had long ignored. The softness of his smile, the deliberate care in his movements, the way he still tried to anticipate my needs. And yet, I also realized the emptiness that had always been there, the quiet longing for something beyond the predictable. Ryan remained a memory, a ghost that stirred my emotions in quiet, unexpected moments. I couldn't forget him, and I couldn't erase what had happened. But I also couldn't undo it. I had been confronted with a version of myself I had buried, a woman craving connection, recognition, and vitality. The experience left me raw, vulnerable, and painfully aware of the choices I had made, and the consequences that would silently shape the years to come. Some nights, I lie awake beside Michael, feeling the warmth of his body and the weight of my secret. I wonder if he would ever notice, if he would ever understand the subtle fractures in my heart. And sometimes I think about Ryan, the laughter, the questions, the spark of life he had reignited. And I realize that one night of weakness can echo through a lifetime. That night changed everything. It reminded me that desire, loneliness, and vulnerability can collide in ways we never anticipate. It taught me that love is not always enough to protect against the choices we make, and that some moments, no matter how fleeting, leave permanent marks. And as I stare into the quiet of our home, I understand that life will go on, but I will never be the same again.